Hi, my name is Jim Crigler. I was a warrant officer helicopter pilot in Vietnam, and the video you're about to see is me returning to Vietnam with my son Brian and my daughter Emily. It was this year, but it was 50 years after I'd been to Vietnam. And I went to Vietnam for one reason, just one, and that was to find the crash site where my roommate was killed, and Tom Shaw was his name, First Lieutenant Tom Shaw, and his aircraft commander, Claude Struthers, as well as several other men, Koreans, were killed as well too in that crash. And we did indeed find the crash site, and we got as close to it as we possibly could. And we conducted, as you will see in this film, a couple of ceremonies. The first ceremony was a Buddhist ceremony that we did out of respect for the Vietnamese people. The ceremony was conducted by our tour guide, whose father was a Viet Cong soldier. We then did our own ceremony where I read letters from Tom's family, made a few comments, and left some coins at the site. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the film, and away it goes.
All right, so I was saying I flew here from January 72 to September, and I became an aircraft commander here. And basically our job was to support the Korean Tiger Division and support various units of the Arvins who had American advisors, either captains or colonels. And fortunately for us, we supported the Koreans, and they were, in a word, a real badass group of soldiers. Those Koreans were tough nuts. I was really happy to be supporting them. But we flew all over two corps, and many of the men that I was with also flew up in Pleiku, the tri-border area, temporary duty. They'd ship us up there when they needed a few extra ships. And so I was also flying in Khartoum as well too. And the Easter offensive, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later, started on March 30th of 1972. And we call it the Easter offensive because Easter was like the next day or two, but the North Vietnamese called it the Nguyen Hue offensive because after their General Nguyen Hue Gap. And I just have to say that all of us pilots, for the most part, we just called it hell because we were suddenly shot at 10 times worse than we were before. There were way more North Vietnamese down there. We did not have the intelligence that that you think we should have. Most of our intelligence came from the bar at the end of the day, where we would meet in the Lane Army Officers Club, and over beers or scotch, we would talk about how hot it was in one area versus another, where we should watch out and be careful. And this area that we're driving through right now, going towards An Khe, as has been mentioned, the war that was here has all but been erased. My first unit was a CAV unit out of Phan Rang, Alpha Troop, 7th to the 17th Air Cav. And after I was there for a couple of months, I met a young first lieutenant named Thomas Francis Shaw, from Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. And Tom was a maintenance guy and a Cobra pilot, but there were no Cobra positions available, so he ended up in a Huey group with me. And we ended up being roommates. And that was at the time when Nixon was pulling a lot of troops out of Vietnam. So he was standing down a lot of the units, and the CAV unit was being stood down. So if you had less than 181 days in country, they moved you to another unit. If you had more than 180 days, they sent you home. Well, I was in the less than 180 days, so they sent me to the 129th Assault Helicopter Company out of An San near Quy Nhon, and this is the area that we flew in. And Tom and I decided we'd be roommates, and I'm glad we did. I passed that information around about Tom so you could see the kind of person he was. Okay, I was a kid in trouble. From a large family, I'm the oldest of 9 children, but I had an absent father, and when that happens, sometimes the boys are like a feather in the wind. You know, you go which way the wind blows, which was my situation. But Tom had a really good upbringing, and he had a real good moral character. Was a big athlete in school. If you opened up that packet that I gave you, you see that Tom was really a star basketball player, very well respected in the Catholic high school he went to, St. Mary Springs. In fact, there's actually an award for him today. It's called the Tom Shaw Award, and it's been going on 49 years. Next year I'll be speaking at the 50th Tom Shaw Award ceremony. But Tom really made a big difference in my life because he shared a way for me to solve my moral dilemma, which was really weighing heavy on my mind. And he looked at me one day and he said, you can't solve a moral dilemma without a moral compass. And so he sat me down and he drew his moral compass out for me, and it was pretty simple. It was, number one, you have to have courage, which not the kind of courage to fly into a hot landing zone, but that helped. But courage to do the right thing, which sometimes requires more courage than flying into a hot landing zone. So courage, do the right thing, be truthful, tell the truth, and for him, trust in God. So those four points. And I've used those 4 points in my life to help many, many people out of issues that they had, out of their own personal moral dilemmas. I don't remember how many years ago, my son Brian would know, I think I was 66. I was rediscovered my Gold Star family. I was a burial escort officer. That was my only R&R in Vietnam. And through that reintroduction to my Gold Star family, I decided to go meet with all the Gold Star families from Vietnam in my area in western Wisconsin and in southeastern Minnesota. I met with about 15 of them, and what I discovered was that they had all been swept under the rug, so to speak. No database of Vietnam Gold Star families. No one's ever thanked them. It was basically a knock on the door, or worse, a telegram. 2 weeks, 10 days, 2 weeks later, a coffin shows up. There was rarely a burial escort officer, so it was the funeral director. They buried their son, sons mostly. They received a neatly folded American flag, and then, without any fanfare, because of the controversial nature of the war, they never talked about it again. And I just have to say that pissed me off. So one day, I was looking out over the Mississippi River, and my son and I were talking. I was saying, I got to do something about this. This is just terrible. It bothers the hell out of me. And he goes, well, you're an expert canoeist. You own 8 canoes. Why don't you go down the Mississippi River and raise hell? And I thought, well, that's a great idea. So I got 2 canoes. A friend of mine owns a canoe company in Winona. He owns Winona Canoe, Mike Chickanowski. And Mike set me up 2 special canoes, and I went up to the headwaters of the Mississippi River in Lake Itasca, Minnesota, and put my canoe in the water on Earth Day. You can actually see that. It's on YouTube. I was followed by Northern Public Television, who did a little 16-minute documentary on me. And if you just Google Jim Crigler, Common Ground, is the name of the company, that'll pop up. But I commenced a solo journey down the Mississippi, and I went all the way to the Moonwalk Steps in the French Quarter of New Orleans, and along the way I met and honored and thanked 362 Gold Star families, most of which were Vietnam Gold Star families. And we should be applauding them, believe me. But usually just 1s or 2s. Occasionally I'd meet with 50 at a luncheon someplace. In the Quad Cities, I met with 100. I met about 60 at a VHPA reunion in Indianapolis. But mostly it was onesie-twosies, and mostly it was children, because the parents are long gone, and the occasional spouse, but a lot of kids. And the thing that really ripped my heart out was, especially the boys, but the girls too, they would say, "If only I knew what my dad was like." You know, they would say that. And I'm holding on here, but I have a coin in my pocket that I minted. I minted 1,000 of them. It's a, let's see if I can hold on here and get it. This is it. It's a replica of a gold star that our government passes out to families that lose a loved one. And on the back it says, "We honor the great sacrifice that you and your family have endured to protect our freedoms." You can pass that around if you want to, so people can see it. But I gave that to every one of them. And what I said was, every time you touch this coin in your pocket, or your purse, or you see it on your dresser at the end of the day, I want you to remember that there are millions of us in America that appreciate and honor the great sacrifice that you have endured. And of course, none of them had ever had anything like that before. And I could see their lips quivering. And here I am, I stink. I've been in a boat all day, rowing, especially down south where it was 100 degrees. But they would come up to me and they would hug me and they would start crying. And I challenge any of you not to cry at a time like that. I did. I just shared my tears with theirs to honor them. So since then, I am very involved with almost anything to do with Gold Star families, not just Vietnam, but especially Vietnam. I speak all over the United States on this kind of stuff. And for those of you that are reading my book now, or may read it, there's a lot of information in there. On March 30th, the Easter offensive started, and it was I don't know how else to describe it other than a shit fest.
They cut the pass.
Yes, they did, and they attempted to cut the pass at Anke Pass, which they wanted to stop. They wanted to cut Highway 19 so that we couldn't get supplies into Khartoum and Pleiku, at least on the ground. And so there was a major offensive on that pass site. And I had flown on that pass for 5 days in a row. And it was, you took your life in your own hands. I mean, the North Vietnamese had it pinpoint accuracy with their mortars. And for any of you that are, know a lot about mortars, I believe it takes about 6 seconds from the time you drop it in until it goes up and comes back down again. So we would get out of there in 5, and we never stopped. We would just hover and dump the water and ammo and whatever else they needed out into the center of the fire base and then take off out of there. And so it was a pretty hairy deal. And frankly, as a 22-year-old know-nothing pilot, I didn't see how there was any way that I would possibly be able to survive those kinds of missions. And I went to my roommate one day, and actually it was on the 26th of April, and I walked into our room and I poured myself 3 fingers of scotch and downed it, and Tom was sitting in the room and he looked up at me and he goes, "What the heck is wrong with you?" And I said, well, today was my lucky day. I don't know that I'll have many more like this, and I need to ask you a great favor. And he was reading a book called Papillon. I'm not sure if you've ever read the book or seen the movie, but it was a good book. Anyway, I looked at him and I said, "Tom, my family's going to be devastated if I'm killed in action. And I wonder if you would do me the honor, if I am killed in action, of escorting my body back to my family." And he stood there and looked at me for about 10 seconds, and then he grabbed that book that he was reading and he raised it up and he sort of waved it like a Bible-thumping preacher, and he said, on one condition, my man, and that is, if I'm killed in action, first, that you escort my body back and do exactly the same thing. And that was in the evening of the 26th of April, 1972. The next day, I woke up late. There was a little note on we had a bar in our room. There was a little note on the bar. It said, "Jim, you'll make it back just fine, Tom." And I got the mission to fly up to Khartoum, and Khartoum was worse than 9K. I'm surprised I made it back alive from that one, but my radios were all shot out. Anyway, when I got back, I discovered that my roommate, flying into the Anke Pass, they were flying really low and really fast because that's the only way we could get around. And unfortunately, his tail rudder hit a tree, disintegrated. The aircraft went up, did 2 loops. The gunner and the crew chief were thrown free and broke a hip and some legs. And one of the 3 Koreans that were on board was also thrown out. The other 2 were killed along with both pilots. So my roommate was killed the very next day. And so true to my word, I was Tom's burial escort officer. So that was the only way I could take that was to take my R&R, because we were really short on pilots. And there was another pilot. The 2 pilots that were killed were Warrant Officer Claude Struthers. Great guy, did not have to be in Vietnam. Volunteered. He was the aircraft commander. And my roommate, the co-pilot, Tom Shaw. Tom was flying the aircraft when everything happened. And I think the last words that the crew chief told me that Claude said was, "Get it up, get it up." So obviously they were flying too low. But we had to fly low. And the reason is that the Russians had provided the North Vietnamese with heat-seeking missiles called Strela missiles, so you could no longer fly about 1,500 feet and get out of small arms range. So we had to fly low and very fast. And that was very, very dangerous. Very dangerous flying.
Right there. This mountain right there. That mountain with 2 ridges. So I had my check ride, my aircraft commander check ride. And I was the only ship to get in we had a company of Koreans that were being overrun by a battalion of North Vietnamese. And I got shot up so bad we lost our hydraulics. But it was my check ride. I was getting my aircraft commander check ride. And when we got back, we had our hydraulics shot out, so we had to do a running hydraulics landing. And I made aircraft commander, but the guy that got the Distinguished Flying Cross was the guy that was giving me the check ride. He didn't even have his hands on the controls, which was basic military protocol. It seemed like things like that happened in the military all the time. So if you got this, that's Bong Song River, and that's Binh Dinh province down there. We're coming down from the Anke Pass, and this is what Tom and Claude would have been flying through. They would fly up and deliver supplies and fly down to the Korean outposts in the base get more supplies, fly up along that ridge as fast as they could and drop them off, and then go back down and get some more. You know, I'll talk a little bit about, you know, I made a solemn pact with my roommate, right? Well, do you think that doesn't happen in almost every war? That happens in all wars. You know, men and women that are in combat, they talk to their buddy, they fight for their buddy, and they ask them for a favor, or maybe it's a dying wish. My own uncle, 19 years old, died on Tarawa. His dying words were, "Please tell my family I love them." And a Marine that was with him made it back to the States, tracked down my family, and told them the story. And it really helped my family big time, because my grandfather did not believe that the remains were even his son. Basically, World War II, you know, that happened quite a bit. But it's a common thread between soldiers in arms that kind of stuff happens, and it's a thread that I will tell you, you know, it's never gone away for me, and I think for most men and women that go through it, it's with you forever. You can imagine what it was like flying up here in the heat of combat with fog and trying to fly fast and coming into a fire base that was under attack and flaring in the middle of it from a 90 or 100 mile knot, you know, going in and then just stopping and dumping and hovering over and then just taking off and going down the pass and looking behind you and seeing mortar shells go off behind you. That's what it was like flying into this. And that's what Tom had flown into and was flying into again. Most of the men that I flew with, they didn't consider themselves heroes. They were just doing their job. We all wanted to get back because Nixon was pulling the troops out. We knew it was just a matter of time before we went, but we still had to do our job. And when the North Vietnamese attacked, these men did everything they were supposed to do. And I'm really proud to have served with all of them. Perfect. The incense to remember the men that were killed.
I do for the traditional for Vietnamese, and I'm make my men stop in here for Vietnamese. If you want, you like for Vietnamese, you come to explain your name and you like my friend for mission action here, and you pay for the God, pay for the money, but pay for the goddess, and this money pay for heaven gods, and this guy for money, you for the heat. After that, burn it, send for him for spend the night, and it's a real Vietnamese whiskey for him. After that, bottle up for him and everybody for ceremony
They
for
like
him.
whiskey.
Yes.
Yeah, they like whiskey.
Yeah, okay.
I'm pretty proud to be standing here in the spirit of my two friends, my mentor, Tom, and my friend, Claude. You know, they gave me, Tom, anyway, gave me a lot in my life and certainly gave me the compassion to forgive the men that killed them, actually. So, I mean, you got to get beyond it. And we were all controlled by other people's ideals, right? Them in Vietnam and us in America. But I still believe that what we did, we ended up doing something good. We stopped communism. Communism did not expand after the Vietnam War. And I get to see what happened here. I mean, again, 50 years has erased all this, all the war. But I see a lot more good done than bad, and I think we had an influence on doing that. I'd like to read a couple of notes, if I may, from the Shaw family. I have nothing from the Strother family, but
The Shaw family is my Gold Star family, and I asked them if they wanted me to say something, and they sent me a couple of things. So this is from Dave Shaw, his brother, and the entire family. Dearest Tom and his wonderful friends and courageous American patriots, that's you. You were our hero always. You always were, and you always will be. It's so hard to believe that it'll be 50 years, last April 27th, that Tom and Claude died in Vietnam. And it seems like only yesterday that we heard 2 car doors slam in the front of our house on a Sunday night at 6 p.m. and 2 people hopped out of the car, a priest and an Army officer. We knew at that very moment that our lives would be changed forever. 4 days later, a courageous... Sorry, I haven't read this. A courageous young burial escort officer and Tom's Vietnam roommate arrived in Fond du Lac with Tom's body. Jim, you've become a brother to us, my friend, and we'll never forget what you've done. Tom, not a day goes by that we don't think of you and Claude. We cannot help but think our lives would have been so much fuller if you were still with us. We know you had the fullest 24 years anyone could wish for, as evidenced by the tremendous impact that you've had on so many. We've been the beneficiaries of that impact. We've met and now know the incredible people like Jim Crigler, Bob Hasselbein, Bernie Hernandez, Bruno Sanchez, Ron Bay, Dennis Fauché, Julie Kink and Mike Spayberry, and so many others. We know that you've been with us all these 50 years, and your spirit lives through all of us. We've felt an angel by our side many times and know that you and Claude are here today. We have to tell you, your mom and dad were so proud of you and missed you terribly. But now they are with you, smiling down on us. You would be so happy to know the love of your life, Anne, is thriving and doing well, and you remain without a doubt the love of her life. I know you feel the same. Someday you'll be together again. Your son Tom is doing very well. Great person, great dad, great businessman. We share your memories every time we're together. And you have 3 wonderful grandchildren. 2 beautiful granddaughters, Elliot and Drew, and a grandson, Max. Drew and Max are twins. All are great students, outstanding athletes, and special folks. The apple did not fall far from the tree. They know all about you, and we talk every single time. Your siblings, Tim, Mary, and Kevin, have all been doing well and thriving with terrific families. In fact, Dave's wife, Magali Shaw, who you never met, talks about you every day, and she asked me to leave this silver coin here. And on the front it says courage. That was one of Tom's key things, and it says you're not alone. And I may just leave it here. She has cancer, and she uses this. Great. Anyway, best always, God bless you, and safe and fulfilling travels, the Shaw family. And then last, Ann Shaw sent this short piece for me to read. Sorry, I get emotional. I haven't read this before. Here again in this place is the beauty and peace of God that was so miserably absent during the war. Then valiant men on both sides sacrificed themselves because of the search for power by others. Those who seemingly had no sense of the value of the common man who was caught up in the terrible storm fighting for his life. I have given him who once gave his all back to you, O God, and I take comfort in believing that he is at peace like this land where he fought and died. Eternal rest grant unto him, O Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon him. And may his soul and those of his comrades who died in Ankh rest in peace. And that's by Ann Kramer Shaw. That was her maiden name. 2 items here. I have this silver ingot, which you say we can bury. This is, and a coin in honor of both of those gents.
It's a minimum. He's set up by Koreans. On the group, Korean. And they are set up one on top and they have one here. Stick it inside. And then cover it up. That's good.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you, Jim.
By the way, that's not water.
No, it's not water.
Thanks for watching that film. Though we initially planned on 2 weeks, we ended up somehow catching COVID-19 when we were over there. And before we came back, we tested positive. And of course, you can't test positive at that time and come back to the United States. They wouldn't allow it. So we had to quarantine for 5 days in Hanoi. But that gave me an opportunity to reflect on the trip, and I realized a number of things. The first is that there are no vestiges of the war in Vietnam. You'd never know that what they call the American War ever took place, except in some of the museums that we went. They have a National War Museum and a museum at Khe Sanh and a few other places where there are, a couple of American aircraft and Hueys there. But there are no vestiges of the war left. The second thing was the Vietnamese people very much like Americans. I was shocked because as a pilot, there was a bounty on my head if I was captured. And I did not expect to be treated with such honor and respect and friendliness as the Vietnamese people treated me. And the third thing was, honestly, in my opinion, we won that war. Everyone there seems to own a business. They're all entrepreneurs. And how could that happen in a communist country? So I asked many of the people there about that, and they all would say to me, we're capitalists just like Americans. We just fly the communist flag. And I had to laugh at that. But I came to the conclusion at the end of that trip that we made a very positive difference eventually in that country. It took a while, but we definitely made a difference. And I believe that the 58,000 men and the 8 women that are listed on the wall, the Vietnam Wall in Washington, D.C., I do not believe that they died in vain. I think they made a positive difference. And frankly, in the history of the world, no other soldier has sacrificed for the freedoms and liberties of total strangers more than the American soldier, the men that I flew with, the men that died over there. And we owe them and their families, especially the Gold Star families, we owe them a great deal of honor and respect. And I, for one, certainly appreciate their sacrifice. Thank you very much for watching.